There we go. Alrighty, I finally got this thing working right. Took me a couple of goes here to get it. So, hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I am going to cover 3 different horror books. And let me see if I can show them to you here. They are Stephen King's If It Bleeds, Bodies, A Romantic Bloodbath, and The Handyman by Bentley Little. But again, before I start all these, let me play my intro. So here we go. Alrighty, so I am back. So let me start talking about these books here, and also want to hopefully can keep an eye on the chat if anybody shows up. So let me start by covering the Stephen King book, since that seems to be a popular author, obviously. So this, If It Bleeds, is a collection of 4 novellas from Stephen King. And let me read exactly what it says here. From #1 New York Times bestselling author, legendary storyteller, and master of short fiction, Stephen King comes with an extraordinary collection of 4 new and compelling novellas. Mr. Harrigan's Phone, The Life of Chuck, Rat, and the title story If It Bleeds, each pulling you into intriguing and frightening places. The novella is from King. The novella is a form King has returned to over and over again in the course of his amazing career, and many have been made into iconic films, including The Body, Stand By Me, and Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption. Like Four Past Midnight, different seasons, and most recently Full Dark No Stars, If It Bleeds is a uniquely satisfying collection of longer short fiction by an incomparably gifted writer. Okay, so let's cover each one of these. I'll cover, the first one was Mr. Harrigan's Phone. I did enjoy that. I thought it was a good story. I liked it. It wasn't the best Stephen King that I've read, but it wasn't bad. I definitely enjoyed the story, and I enjoyed the characters. It's basically, the story is there's this kid who is reading to this elderly person. He gives him an iPhone, and this iPhone winds up becoming kind of like a really important issue for this elderly gentleman before he dies. And then, of course, in typical Stephen King fashion, this kid actually winds up kind of getting messages from this cell phone, or from this dead person. Or are they really messages? And that's basically the story. It's really a pretty good story. I actually did enjoy it. I thought it was, again, not the greatest Stephen King, not the worst, but a pretty good story. The second story, unfortunately, The Life of Chuck, oh boy. I could not get into the story. I didn't like the setup of the story. It's done in a certain way where it's like the ending is first, like Act 3 is first, and then Act 2, and then Act 1. And it's basically kind of like the end of the world when Chuck dies. I just didn't like it. I can't even describe it to you. It was one of the really Stephen King just trying to be Stephen King and trying to be, I guess, a little edgier, trying to, break with the format, and it didn't work at all in my mind. This is the one story out of these three that I really didn't like at all. Rat is a really cool story. Rat is probably, out of all four stories, actually, probably one of my favorites. I think Rat is probably one of the favorite ones, because Rat is basically about this novelist who, would-be novelist, who, wants to sell his book. And this rat comes to him and kind of makes him a deal that if you want to be successful, actually want to write a novel for the first time, he was a successful English teacher, I believe college professor, who wants to write novels. If you want to write this novel, someone has to die, and you have to pick somebody who has to die. And of course, it's a whole, kind of like Sell Your Soul type of thing, Monkey's Paw. You've had the story again, but it was done well. I really did enjoy it. And I think out of the four stories, to me, it was the most classic Stephen King. If It Bleeds, I did like, and I'll explain, why I liked it. But I still think that Rat, in my mind, from out of these four books, was my favorite story. If It Bleeds leads to, I believe, Holly from the at the end of Watch. Was it Bill Higgins? Story, basically The Outsider, and those Stephen King books where he had those, that story, and Holly was, in the detective agency of the Finders Keepers detective agency. It's basically like another character who is kind of like an outsider. So obviously reference to that book would be helpful. I don't think it's necessary, but it would be helpful in this book. And again, a good story. It was nice to see her again. It was nice to see, this character who is kind of creepy. And fans of those other books and this character would really enjoy If It Bleeds, which is obviously the title of this book. But again, it was a kind of story where it was classic King. It reminds me a little bit of the first one, the Mr. Harrigan one, where I liked it, but it wasn't the greatest King. To me, it wasn't like the best of this story. It was definitely, just on average par for Stephen King. So what did I think about this thing overall? Well, firstly, there was 4 stories, and I liked 3 of the 4. So for me, this is definitely, if you like Stephen King, as opposed to me, like not liking his other book trilogy, where he only had like the one story of 1408 that was good. For me, thinking The Institute really didn't grab you at all. This one, I did say, okay, I could see why, if you're a King fan, definitely you would like this. While there is some standard King in like 2 of the stories, I thought The Rat was, to me, a little bit more interesting. Maybe it's just because that's something that I personally like, so that was why I enjoyed that one. So let me pick another one. This one, Bodies, a Romantic Bloodbath. This was really weird for me. And I say it's weird basically because it's hard to classify this. Let me just read the actual synopsis and you can get the idea of what I'm talking about here. High school genius and sociopath Vince Nielsen is obsessed with Melissa Price, so when she rejects him after a few dates, he devises the perfect plan, manipulates her genes to make an even better version of her, one who's more receptive to him, of course. He'll have to kill the real Melissa first, but it is really murder if the person still exists. As he continues to perfect Melissa, he realizes he can change the world, one gene at a time. Before long, Vince is the underground celebrity, and his company, Emergence Inc., is in high demand, with spouses wishing to replace their better halves with improved clones and parents desiring healthy children. But the pursuit of perfection has ramifications. Now, decades later, when a body mysteriously shows up at young Leo Oak's door, it's up to him and his girlfriend, Sarah Hawkins, to unravel the enigma of a new world where authenticity is ambiguous and no one is who they seem. As the two grow closer, they begin to discover secrets about their own past and just how entwined their lives are with Emergence Inc., a thought-provoking and vividly imaginative techno thriller set in the not-so-distant future. Bodies examines the price of idealism in this riveting page-turner. Okay, So, what do I think of this book? I did enjoy it. It's weird because it kind of has a multiple options. As far as, yes, it's kind of horror. It's also science fiction. It also has, some romance in it, obviously with the romantic issues. The Vince and Melissa, that's kind of tough. But there actually are, like, once you see the story about Vince basically being obsessed with Melissa, and it's a very kind of like abusive relationship with these clones that he makes. That first part of the book is kind of, depending on what you're interested in, might be a little hard to swallow. But once it gets past that and starts actually getting into how this technology kind of advanced, how it started to go past them, dealing with the president, dealing with actually there's a little vignette about the Queen in the beginning of this story. That's pretty funny, and it also has humor in it too. So there's humor in it. There's obviously with a psychopath, there is some horror elements to it. There also is obviously sci-fi elements to it. So it really fits into a lot of different genres, and I like that. I really liked that about this book. I did enjoy this book. I think this was something that I was glad I read. Again, this was on Kindle Unlimited, so if you have Kindle Unlimited, you could easily read it. And also, I believe it says here, free with your Audible. No, not an Audible trial. But it's still a really good short story. It's not that long, and I enjoyed it. With bodies, again, not something that it's amazing, but I did like that it actually, again, like they said here, original. I do think it was original. I think it's, has a lot of different options, especially with cloning and with the ramifications of cloning. Also, the clones, which I won't spoil a little bit, the clones start having like some kind of a little bit of a superpower, so it kind of even gets into that. If you're interested in like superhero type thing, it actually does have a little bit of like the clones kind of have these superpowers, which is kind of cool. So again, it's just a hodgepodge of a lot of different kinds of things that just kind of like meld together to do what I thought was a pretty interesting story. So that's my review of Bodies, a Romantic Bloodbath. Last one I'm going to talk about, obviously, is my favorite, which I've been doing these videos. The last one is Bentley Little's The Handyman. So let me again read this. Daniel Martin has never forgotten his childhood encounters with Frank Watkins, the man who built his family a summer home out of cardboard and plywood. Frank's gaze was oddly confusing if he was attempting to discern the proper way to behave because he didn't know how to respond in a human manner. Since Frank obviously wasn't an alien, young Daniel thought maybe the man was crazy. In the end, Daniel would learn the terrifying truth about Frank Watkins. As an adult, Daniel is about to discover there are more of them out there. More of them is actually more of the actual houses. If you don't know who Bentley Little is, this is classic Bentley Little. This is, again, I'm going to say out of all three books, this is my favorite. I do like Bentley Little. I really like the way he writes, especially this. This is, like I said, this is classic Bentley Little. He starts off with a weird premise. The premise is that this Daniel's parents are getting a summer home, and it's kind of like a prefab that that gets to be built on their own. So they hire this handyman, this Frank Watkins, to help them build his home. And basically, it starts off with Frank basically built things horribly. Things are missing. You wind up finding that he has a reputation for stealing things and everything else. But it starts going, of course, like typical Bentley Little. That the house that Frank Watkins built has a little bit more of a darkness to it. Things start happening, and they start finding out more about Frank. And what's cool is, this spans a long time. It spans Frank in the Vietnam War. It spans, when Daniel was a child and what happened to his parents. Then obviously when he's an adult, it spans some of the different interactions that Frank had with other people who he helped build things for. And Frank becomes this big boogeyman in this book. And the way they build it, and Bentley keeps building the tension and building the actual weirdness of Frank and what's actually going on. That's when it just becomes way interesting to me. I really did enjoy. Again, I really did enjoy this book. If you're a fan of Bentley Little, I think The Handyman is a great book. Just know that typical Bentley Little, there are some sexual scenes in here that are a little weirded out. That seems to be I guess a trope that Bentley Little uses in all of his books. He does have some weird, sometimes somewhat abusive sex scenes in all of his books. So that's in there. There is some animal cruelty in this book. So again, if you have issues with that, you might want to stay away from that. But otherwise, I would highly recommend this. This is probably the third Bentley Little book that I've read, and I really enjoyed it. The last two I read were A Store, and I read The Association. I also read a collection of short stories by Bentley Little that I wasn't that interested in, but again, I really enjoyed Bentley Little. I'm actually currently reading another one that once I get to, I can cover as well. But I'm rambling. So The Handyman, great story, highly recommend it, especially if you're a Bentley Little fan. My top book out of the three. And again, if you sat here all the way to the end, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon. So, bye.